Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about business plans, taking your business plan to the next level. I'm Diane McKeever, and this is being brought to you by SCORE Minnesota. Our presenter, Alan Gorlick, is standing by waiting to take off in one of the planes, perhaps behind him. I don't know. I'm hoping that he'll stick around for at least the next hour. But before we get started and hear all that Alan has to say, we need to just do a little bit of homework. So, Alan, if you would click, let's go on to the next slide. If you don't know about SCORE, SCORE is a nationwide organization. Ours is the Minnesota chapter. There are over 300 chapters nationwide. We all offer free, confidential business mentoring for as long as you need it. It is always free. Our chapter has nearly 90 volunteers who are waiting to help you move your business to the next level. Our chapter recently was named as a District Chapter of the Year. Click. So, at what point in your business can we help you? If you're in the pre-startup, you just had an idea, we can help you determine whether or not that idea is viable, whether or not you can make money. Or if you're in the startup phase, you've opened and now you want to move on and you realize that you don't know everything about everything, we can help you with that. Or you want to grow your business. Or lastly, if you want to sell or close your business, we have a whole team that will help you do that. Or conversely, if you're thinking about buying a business, the selling and closing team can help you with the valuation of the business and help you decide whether it's a good deal or not. So please think about applying for a mentor. And where would you do that? You would go to score.org/Minnesota. There's a good old button there that says request a mentor. You give it a little bit of information, such as your zip code and what you're looking for in a mentor, what your business challenges are, and a mentor will be assigned to you. So please consider doing that. Click. Lastly, I'd like to thank our sponsors and community partners. These are the folks that keep the lights on. They help us pay for webinars and seminars and all kinds of things. So thank you to our sponsors. You'll note that many of them are financial institutions. You'll find that if you walk into any of these financial institutions with your mentor or with the business plan that your mentor has helped you with, they're going to listen a lot more closely to you than if you just walked in with a pile of papers. So consider frequenting our sponsors and community partners. All right, Alan, I think it's up to you to take it away.
Okay, well, this is sort of the second of 3 webinars we're doing this month on the subject of business planning. And hopefully you tuned in last week when a couple of my colleagues talked about our template for business plans and went through a lot of the basics of doing a business plan. They spoke a lot about marketing and about your value proposition, and they went through the various steps on our business model canvas so that you could use that template. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to build on that. So we're not going to repeat very much from last week. In fact, hopefully there won't be much overlap at all. But we're going to talk about some areas where you can go to the next step with your business plan. But just a quick review, why would you write a business plan? Well, the most common reason we hear is that someone went out for funding, they went to the SBA or to their bank, and they said, well, you need a plan. And they said, well, we don't have a plan. We don't know how to do a plan. And they said, well, then you need to call SCORE. And so many of our clients come to us because the funding source said they needed a plan and they weren't sure how to write one. But here's some of the basic reasons why you would write a plan. And hopefully you will cover them all. And if you use our business model canvas, here's what it looks like. So it's an opportunity to remember things that maybe you didn't think of when you wanted to write a plan. And it's an opportunity to fill it in. And if you didn't watch the webinar last week, I recommend that you go to our website and find it. We do record them all and we keep them, I don't know for how long, but I think for years. So you can find it and go through it again because this is a good tool. And of course, we can send you the canvas to work on. We can also send you a spreadsheet, a basic spreadsheet that you can use to do the financial part of your business plan. But for today, for the next level, we're going to cover all of these subjects. So this is kind of our agenda. And as you listen to these, some of them you'll say, oh, I really should have thought of that. I'll put that in my plan immediately. Some of the things they'll apply to you, but maybe not right away. Maybe they don't need to go in the first draft of your plan, but you'll need them at some point. And maybe some of these things don't apply to you at all, and that's okay. But I want to present every one of them so that you will understand what they are and you can use the ones that make the most sense. And if you do have questions, jump onto the chat and ask your question. Diana's monitoring the chat. And if it's a question that can wait to the end, we'll wait till the end. If it's a question that really needs to be answered that minute, we'll answer it in real time. So the first subject I want to talk about are critical success factors. And I think this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. That's why it's number one on the list. Your business plan should have your critical success factors. And these are necessary conditions. These are things that have to go right to reach your milestone. So, if you write a complete plan, you're going to write, maybe a dozen activities to reach each of your milestones. And if you write them down, you probably plan to do them all. But there's usually one that just has to go right, that if it doesn't happen, you're just not going to make it to the goal. And it's different from the goal or the milestone because the milestone is the scorecard. It's a metric. Did you make the revenue goal? Did you get the number of clients you wanted? Did you get the market share you were looking for? But it's a metric. It doesn't tell you how to get there. The critical success factors tell you how to get there. These are the things that have to happen or you're not going to get to the milestone. And we'll do some examples so you can see how this fits. Now, a milestone may have more than one critical success factor. That's okay. But if it has too many, then they're probably not all critical. And you have to rethink, which ones are really critical and which ones, well, if it happens, it's okay, but we can get around it if it doesn't happen. I like to think of golf analogies all the time because I'm totally hooked on golf. So sometimes in golf, we have what we call a risk-reward shot, where you can try to hit the ball over this hazard, maybe it's a pond, or you can go around it, right? Well, if you can go around it, then it's not critical that you hit over it. It's not a critical success factor. It's something that might be nice. It might get you the fewer strokes on your scorecard, but it's not a critical factor. On the other hand, there are some hazards you come to on the course where you have to hit over this water. There's no way around it. Then it's critical. And you would need to think of those. And one of the benefits of doing it, in addition to giving you a way to get to your milestone, is it helps combat magical thinking. And my experience as a consultant to many businesses over the years is one of the things that'll kill you is magical thinking. So you might say, well, we're going to get $1 million of revenue by the end of the first year. And how are we going to do that? Well, we don't know. We're just going to bust our ass. We're going to work really hard and we're going to sell like crazy and we're going to get there. It's great that you have a can-do attitude, but that's magical thinking. That's not telling you how to get there. And if you don't know how you're going to get there, you don't know if you're doing the right things. It's obvious, and yet so many people fall into magical thinking. I've done a lot with restaurants. And one of the issues with restaurants is location. And what tends to happen is people who are in another career field decide they want to open a restaurant. It's always their dream. They have grandma's spaghetti sauce recipe, and they know they can build a whole business on this spaghetti sauce. But they don't have the budget to open the super restaurants, so they cave on location. They open on a location, doesn't have enough parking, not going to get walk-in traffic. But the spaghetti sauce is so good, they're not worried about that. And a year later, they're out of business because the magical thinking took over and they just didn't realize that it's not going to work. So the critical success factors will help combat the magical thinking, at least I hope they will. Also, as a sales tool, let's say that your business involves selling to other businesses, as many businesses certainly do. And one of the things you have to do in sales is you have to qualify your prospects. You have to say, is this prospect likely to buy from me? And so getting the prospect to tell you their critical success factors is a key thing. Let's say that your business, you're a headhunter. You're opening a new headhunting business. And you're cold calling and you get someone on the phone and they say, well, actually, our goal this year is to triple our sales. And you say, oh, that's great, because we are in the headhunting business and we could help you find way more salespeople. And you just start selling them on hiring more salespeople. And you never found out that that's not their critical success factor. They have enough salespeople. Their critical success factor is making sure that their new product actually works. It's an R&D problem. It's not a number of salespeople problem, but you didn't know that because you didn't ask them their critical success factors. So you have to have that to qualify the prospects and then to target your activities. So let's jump into an example. Let's say that your goal is $500,000 in first year revenue. Right, that may be reasonable. I'm not sure what businesses you're all in, but let's just say that's your goal. Well, look at these four totally different critical success factors. Maybe to get to the revenue, you need more sales reps. Maybe you need regulatory approval. Maybe you need retail, or maybe you need successful beta with new clients, new customers, or maybe some different ones. But you can see just looking at these how different they are. And if you just went to magical thinking, we're going to get 500,000, and you didn't articulate these critical success factors, your plan's really not complete. And of course, each of these critical success factors will have sub CSF. So let's say your critical success factor was number 2, regulatory approval within 3 months, right? Well, maybe under that, you need legal review within the first month, or you need to have your maybe you're in the drug business and you need your drugs to actually be working before you can even ask for regulatory approval. Or, I think you get the idea that once you know what the critical success factor is, then you can start to build on that critical success factor, what activities you have. And as you'll see on my next slide, then you can start to say when each one has to happen. So now we're not just on a first year revenue goal, but you've got a whole bunch of goals during that year that will get you to that first year revenue. And each of those goals has a critical success factor or more than one. And now you have a business plan that's living. You can look at it every day and say, how am I doing? What can I change? What's working and what isn't working? So that's why I think that critical success factors are the most important thing. And truth is, I see it very rarely in business plans. I see a lot of business plans. I've helped a lot of people write business plans. I've written them as a consultant. And generally, people are happy when they've got the milestones and they don't really think through what it's going to take to get to them. So that leads us to the second, with some similar words, the critical path. So how are you going to get your critical success factor to happen, and where are you going to schedule them? Especially if you're inventing something or designing something or establishing a new business or a new location, you need to understand which paths are critical. And there's a lot of ways to get there. There's a design tool that's called PERT. I can't even remember now what the letters stand for. I know that R&T, or review technique. PERT comes from the 1950s. It was developed by the U.S. Navy for the Polaris submarine, right? And so it's been around a long time, and it still works. It's in fact, when I was in business school, I did a whole project on the math behind PERT, excuse me. And now we're talking about the 1970s when I did mine. So it was already old news. It was developed in 1950s. I did my research project in the 1970s. There was no internet in those days. I sat in the library at Syracuse University and blew dirt off of old math books to try to figure this out. But it still works. And now you can do it on a computer and you can figure out which of your paths to get to the result are the critical ones and which ones have some slack. And this is a very basic view of a PERT chart. So the activities are on the lines and the milestones are in the circles. And so you can see that just a little bit of quick arithmetic, that ABC is the critical path because it has to be done in 15 weeks, 15 days, 15 months. It has to be done in 15 or C won't be done. Now, if you look at FGC, you can see you have 22 weeks to do that one. So it has some slack. But if you look at DBC, that's 17 weeks. So that has slack. But ABC does not have any slack. That has to be on schedule or your whole project will be behind schedule. And that's what PERT is all about. And the math of PERT, when I did my project, it used Poisson distributions. I think now they use beta distributions. So if you're into statistics, you know what those mean. If you're not, just picture a bell curve. Everybody knows what a bell curve looks like. Well, these distributions have the bell curve leaning to the right. And it's because humans tend to be overly optimistic when we schedule. So use distributions that said and know we're going to be it's going to take longer than we thought. And those are the numbers you put in there with a little bit of extra lean. Now, if you're looking for a tool to help you get there, one of the most famous ones is Microsoft Project. And I put on this slide that I got this information from Microsoft on their website to make the point that I'm not selling Microsoft Project. I'm not even recommending it. I'm merely pointing out that it is probably the most popular tool, and it does all of these things that you need. It will do PERT. It will also do Gantt charts, which you can see on the bottom right of the slide. We'll do Scrum boards. That may be a new word for you. You think of Scrum from football, but Scrum boards often are not done on a computer. They're actually big boards in the office, and you have sticky notes hanging on them. But the idea is you're looking at all your projects or all your teams and seeing what they're doing at a certain time and are they hitting their goals. So you can have Microsoft Project will have your task assignments. It will help you see where your slack is. It'll give you feedback. It'll give you a zillion kinds of reports, and you can do it all on your laptop computer. So it's one way to get there. It's not the only way, but it's a very good way. Now I want to talk about, next subject I want to talk about is using your computer to help you get away from magical thinking or from eyeballing projects by using a tool called Monte Carlo simulation. And that's really a whole seminar into itself. So we're not going to talk a lot about how to do it. But there are a lot of tools, they fit right into Excel or into Numbers or whatever a spreadsheet tool you're using. But let's say that you have a project and it has 10 sub-projects, or the example I took is from writing software. So there's 10 subroutines, but they can be 10 independent projects to get to your project. And let's say that each of them is estimated to take 6 units, be 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, doesn't matter. Now, if you looked at this and you said, well, here's the rule. The project's not done until they're all done, right? So one being done early doesn't compensate for one that was done late. And that's an important consideration because very often we estimate things, they balance out. So let's say that you say, the average time it takes me to drive to work is 35 minutes. Well, some days I do it in 30 and some days I do it in 40, but it averages to 35 because the days when I'm quick were sort of balanced with the days where there was traffic, right? But this is different. This is something that they all have to be done by, or the project's not done. Well, you eyeball this and you would say, well, on average, it's going to be done in 6 units, right? Because I looked at this chart and every one of them is at 6. So on average, they'll be done at 6, but they won't be done at 6 because if any one of them slips, the entire project will slip. And if you do the Monte Carlo simulation, here's what you get, right? This is right out of a book called The Flaw of Averages, which is a great name. You think about, we used to talk about the law of averages. Well, a guy named Sam Savage wrote a book called The Flaw of Averages. And Sam's a great guy. He's been doing this forever. His father was Jimmy Savage, who was on the Manhattan Project. So this stuff is in his blood. And I've known Sam for a long time. Back in the 1990s, I was teaching at Cal, and Sam was teaching at Stanford. And I took a seminar with Sam, and I've been a fan of his ever since. And he wrote The Flaw of Averages, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. But you can see after your Monte Carlo simulation, your likely time is going to be 8 units, not 6. So let's call them weeks, 8 weeks, not 6 weeks. And even more to the point, there is the most optimistic of all is 6.3 weeks. There is no solution where this is all done in 6 weeks. And again, if you're into statistics, one way to think about this is it's like flipping a coin and getting 10 heads in a row, right? It can happen. It does happen. If you flip a coin 1,000,000 times, you'll get it. Probably even if you flip a coin 1,000 times, you get 10 heads in a row. But you won't get it just flipping it 10 times or 20 times or 50 times. And to have all of these 10 projects be done on time is the same as getting the 10 heads in a row. And that's why you need the simulation or some other tool similar to simulation to see what it's really going to take. And you need to put the realistic time into your business plan. Now, if you do the simulation, your output, these are two of the most popular outputs. You can get a histogram or you can get a cumulative probability distribution. And I like the cumulative one. That's the one on the right. And the example here is, if you can see the tiny print, it's British pounds. It's not US dollars, but it's the same idea. And it says, what are the chances that I can keep the cost under a certain amount? Well, I have a 100% chance of keeping it under 440 pounds, or actually there's a K there, so 440,000 pounds. But I only have a 50% chance of keeping it under about 330. And if you really want to keep it under, say, 280 pounds, 280,000 pounds, we only have about a 15% chance of hitting that number. So the cumulative probability distribution gives you in one, the picture that's worth 1,000 words. This is one. It tells you immediately what your odds are of hitting that number. And I can tell you, having been a user of Monte Carlo simulation for a really long time, that I've done presentations for people who understand nothing about statistics, who believe that anyone presenting something to them is going to inflate the results to make it look better than it is. And they look at a cumulative probability distribution and they get it. They get it immediately. They stop accusing the presenters of inflating the numbers because you can tell them where it came from. So it's a very good way to get a number to put into your business plan and say, we got a 50-50 shot of saving, keeping the cost below this amount. We got an 80% chance we'll keep it below that amount. And, if we can get 80% chance of keeping it below a certain amount, well, we can put that amount in our business plan. But we're not likely to spend more than that. So it's a really good tool. And, it takes a separate seminar and a little training, but once you get it, you'll get it. It's not hard to operate. If you can operate a spreadsheet, you can do Monte Carlo simulation. Now, if you're selling something, you have to recognize it explicitly in your business plan that you're not going to get paid the day you sell, right? Unless you're selling newspapers on a street corner and someone hands you $1 and you hand them a newspaper, you're not going to get paid right away. And whether you're using cash accounting or accrual accounting, hopefully you know what those words mean when I say it, but whichever accounting technique you're using, cash is still king. If you run out of cash, the game is over. It's like playing Monopoly. You have to have the cash. So you need to explicitly consider in your business plan when you're going to get your cash. And one of the best ways to do that is to create a cash conversion cycle chart like this one. It's a little bit out of focus. Sorry about that, but it was the best one I could find online. But if you're building something, well, you're not going to sell it till it's built. And maybe you have to keep it in inventory even longer before you even sell it. And then when you sell it, you have to wait to get paid. Unless, as I said, unless you're selling newspapers and getting the dollar right then, you're probably not going to get paid right away. Business to business pays in 30 days if you're lucky, right? And then, so that's getting the cash in is on top of the line. Under the line is the cash out, right? Because you paid for the inventory. You paid people that you owe money to, and you probably paid them before you got paid. And so that cash conversion cycle is the time that you're not going to have that money. So you better be sure that you either can make that cash conversion cycle smaller, and I'm going to show you in a minute how to do that, or you better be sure you have enough cash on hand to cope with the best cash conversion cycle you can come up with. So how do you fix it? Well, let's talk about fixing the top, right? How do you make sure that you're going to have money sooner so that you're not waiting for the money? Well, one of them is just-in-time inventory. We used to teach this you can take a whole course, whole logistics course. They'll teach you about just-in-time inventory, which means you don't keep a lot of inventory. You order something when you get the order. I mean, that's how Amazon started, right? When Amazon started, they didn't have these giant warehouses all over the country like they do now. They had no warehouses at all. You ordered a book and they ordered a book, right? They went to the publisher. They had good deals with the publishers, and the publishers would give them the book quickly, but they didn't have any books. There's still a lot of just-in-time inventory even now. It's a great way to not have a lot of money tied up in inventory, but as we saw during the supply shocks through the pandemic, people had just-in-time inventory, had no inventory. So you have to balance it. It's not a panacea as we once thought it was, but it's still an alarm bell. It's still a warning that if you can keep your inventory down or make sure that you limit yourself to things that are going to sell quickly, you're going to tie up less cash in inventory. And that leads to the second bullet of inventory management. When I lived in England, there was a big supermarket there, it's still there, called Sainsbury's. And Sainsbury's is kind of like a Publix or a Kroger's. They're minimum to high end. They have lots of stores. And one of the things they did when I was there was they had a survey of, they surveyed their customers for like, which beer do you like best that we want to be sure to have, or which cookies do you like best, or, they tended to the things that had high margins. They weren't too interested in which things you like best where they didn't make any money. But they did the survey, and then they supposedly, and I say supposedly because I don't know for sure if they did it honestly, but they supposedly published the results. And so let's say the result was that the favored beer was Coors Light. That wasn't one of theirs because it was in England, but let's just say that they came out with the result that the favored beer was Coors Light. And now they have a giant display of Coors Light. It's easy to bet. It's all cold. It's on sale, right? So that does two things. One is, if that's really the answer they got, then they're going to stock more Coors Light and maybe less Bud Light, because that's the one that won the inventory. But the other thing is, even if that wasn't the one that won, by telling you it won, they're going to lead people to Coors Light. Because maybe you weren't sure. Maybe you never had a light beer. You always like the taste of the full service, the full bodied beers. And you're trying to try a light beer because you know it has 1/10 of the carbs of a full beer, which, by the way, it does. So, well, I don't know which light beer to try, but people who shop at Publix all like Coors Light, so I'll try Coors Light. So it becomes self-fulfilling. So whether in fact it won the survey or not doesn't matter. it's a great way to manage the inventory because they're stocking up on Coors Light, and that's the one they're going to sell. Another way to get the money quick is to take credit cards. Visa, MasterCard pay you, I think, the same day. It's almost like depositing a check where you get credit overnight. I don't know that American Express or Discover pay that fast, but they all pay quickly. And you'll pay a fee for that. And the fee is big. It could be as much as 3%. So if you're selling something for $2, 3% doesn't sound like a lot. That's only 6 cents, but there's probably a minimum. So the minimum might be 25 cents. So if you're selling something for $2, you're giving the credit card company 25 cents, that might be your whole profit. But if you're in a business where you're also selling things for $100, you're willing to deal with the fact that credit cards for $3 aren't going to be a good deal. Or you might say we don't take credit cards for anything under $20. But whatever it is, if you can take credit cards, that's going to take away a lot of the burden. But maybe you're not in a business where credit cards make a lot of sense, where you have to manage your receivables. And that's a hard thing to do. And I used to run a high-tech company in Silicon Valley. And we sold everything with receivables. And our customers all promised to pay within 30 days. And maybe even gave them a discount if they paid within 10. But the fact is they didn't pay in 30 days. They promised, but they didn't do it. And so one day we got our accounting staff together, and I always chuckle when I picture the event because a lot of these people were, typical accounting clerks. They were not outgoing people. They were people who, they went into accounting because they liked the fact that they could just be on their own and, the green eye shade kind of look. We said to them, here's what you're going to do. You're going to call every client who owes us money, and you're going to ask for the money. And it was like, oh my God, I can't do that. and we said, yeah, you can. And remember, the person at the other end of the phone line will be just like you. They'll be as uncomfortable receiving the call as you'll be making the call. And so they made the calls, and we listened in because we wanted to make sure this was going well. And so, the call would start with, hi, and they're sucking air across their teeth, if you can picture that, and they're saying, hi, this is Mrs. Jones, and I'm calling you from ICOS, and you got this bill that you're supposed to pay last week, and do you think maybe you could take a look at it? I mean, they were just so scared. Well, what happened was it always worked because they were calling the person like them who didn't want to get another call, so they wrote the check, right? We paid with checks in those days. And I tell you, by the third month, it was like the mob calling you and offering to break your kneecaps. They had so much confidence that the calls just went right through. And we did a tremendous improvement on our receivables. Now, if that doesn't work, you can always borrow against your receivables. They're very good collateral if your customers are good collateral. I used to run a British company. It was multinational. All of our customers were companies you would have heard of. They were, in every country. They were the top technology companies like Siemens and Intel, and you would have heard of all of them. And so we could borrow against our receivables because they were good credit. It didn't matter whether we were or not. We kind of were, but it didn't matter because our customers were good credits. And then in the limit, if you can't borrow against your receivables, you can factor them. We actually sell the receivables to somebody else. That's really a last resort because then they're going to use very high pressure techniques to collect on those receivables. And you really don't want your clients being subjected to the high pressure unless there's no other way. It's a long story. It took a lot of time on this slide, but it's really important because cash is king. As I said, you want to make sure you get your cash as soon as possible. Now let's look at the bottom. You want to get the money in fast, you want to pay it out slow, right? So one of the ways is just to negotiate better payment terms. And I'm not saying do what my customers did. I'm not saying agree to 30 days and pay in 90. I'm saying agree to 90, right? tell your vendors that you're in a business where your cash comes in slowly and you just can't commit to 30 days or 60 or whatever it is. I mean, each deal is negotiated separately, but negotiate where you don't have to pay as fast. Also, if you do have to get inventory, get it on consignment. Don't pay for it, right? Get it so that if you don't sell it, you can give it back. It's done a lot in department stores like Macy's. A lot of their inventory is on consignment, where if they can't sell it, they give it back. And you can use credit cards. So not only can you receive your money through a credit card, but you can pay with credit cards. The business credit cards, I mean, there are ads all over television for companies that want to offer you a business credit card because it's good business for them to offer it and it's good for you to have it. And very often the perks are great. They give you back 2% on all your business spending. And if you're spending millions, it's a lot. Even if you're spending hundreds, it's a lot of money. Now, if you saw the program last week, my two colleagues did talk about SWOT. They focused mostly on the strengths part of SWOT. They didn't talk about all four letters, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And in the strengths area, they talked mostly about core competencies. What are you good at? In fact, I think they actually said several times, what are you good at? Come on, what are you good at? And it's important. You really need to look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. What are you really good at? But there are other strengths. You can have advantages because you're further along the development curve, or because you already have patents that other people don't have, or maybe can't even get because they would be infringing on yours. You can have relationships that you've built up over the years, right? These are all strengths. So it isn't just what you're good at. It's what networking you've done over the years or what products you've already invented that form your strengths. But you gotta list them, you gotta write them down, and you gotta be honest with yourself. Then on weaknesses, which ones are curable and which ones are structural? And by that, I mean the curable ones are the things you can fix fairly easily. Like, we have 10 salespeople, we need 12, right? Well, if the other two are going to look like the first 10, maybe it's not so hard to find two more. Or maybe it's you need to add another 10,000 feet to your warehouse, and you already own the land. It's not that hard to add 10,000 feet. If it's structural, you had to add 10,000 feet because you have no more land, right? Or you need a rail line and the railroad refuses to come to you, right? Those are harder to fix. In the long run, you could probably fix them all, but you really need to understand which ones can I cure quickly and easily. They may require money, may require time, but I can see the way to cure them versus the ones that, really, there's just no easy way to do it, or it may be impossible. Maybe you, in order for your new product to work, you need a PhD in nuclear physics. And you don't know anybody with a PhD in nuclear physics because you were an English major. Well, then, maybe that's just not a good business for you to be in. Now, since I do this a lot with students, not just in marketing classes, but even in finance class, I find that when they get to the opportunities part, they just repeat their strengths. Well, no, that's not your opportunity. Your opportunity is leveraging your strength. What can you, all those things you did on the first S, what can you do with them to make a business out of it? And, it comes down to what's your selling proposition? What's your, what's the whole reason you have for being in business? And if you don't have opportunity, that's why my third bullet is better find some. Well, then you don't have a business, right? You better think of some opportunities where what you're good at is going to turn into a business, right? And then the threats, again, that's not a repeat of your weakness. It's ways that your weaknesses can be exploited. And boy, they can be exploited from a million directions, things you didn't think about. That's why we keep encouraging you to write it down. We want you to think about it, right? Because your threats can come from your competitors, from your customers, right? Your customers using a product and then they sue you. I mean, we all know the famous story of the person who spilled hot coffee on her lap and sued McDonald's, right? Because McDonald's didn't tell her the coffee was going to be hot. I don't think she won that lawsuit. I think it was overturned on appeal, but it's a great lawsuit. And I used to have Ingersoll Rand as a client. And one of Ingersoll Rand's products is the Bobcat tractor. If you've ever done any work or watched road crews, you see these rather small tractors, and they have like a tank tread to move around. And I met with the liability lawyers at Ingersoll Rand, and they were routinely sued by their customers, and especially with the Bobcats, because people do things like put the Bobcat on the roof, and they're driving it around, and they fall off the roof, and then they sue Ingersoll Rand. And the lawyer said, you know, our job is to make sure we told them you can't ride this on the roof. And so customers are very often the biggest threat. You really need to think this through. And if you have products that can be misused, you need to make sure you warn people and you have the right lawyers. But the regulators are a threat. I'm in the financial services business. I think our biggest threat comes from regulators. You can't even imagine the things they're going to come after you for. And of course, the economy can be a threat. It can be a low economic environment. So you really need, again, you need to write this down and you need to think it through. Say, okay, these are the threats, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And that sort of leads very nicely into risk management. You need to recognize that you have risks. Your business has risks. The obvious ones are nobody wants to buy from you. Your products don't work. Your competitor comes to town and undercuts your price. I mean, they're obvious risks, but there are also risks that maybe aren't so obvious. You need an early warning system to find. And one of the things we often use, you may have even heard of this, is you think about risk prevention like taking slices of Swiss cheese. And if these slices didn't come from the same block of cheese, the holes are not going to be in the same place. And so your protection is that the holes don't line up, right? But if they do line up, that's when things go bad, that all the risks lined up. The best recent example is Silicon Valley Bank, right? You probably already heard of them, maybe you even used them. They went bust almost overnight, right? They were a super business. They were really smart. They named their bank after their customers, right? We want to sell to Silicon Valley. We'll call ourselves Silicon Valley Bank. And I can tell you, since I ran a Silicon Valley company, what they did was not all that unique. Chase did the same thing. Bank of America did the same thing. But they got a lot of business because they were so smart. They had the right name and they put themselves in Silicon Valley. But then things went wrong and the bank went bust. And I thought about the Swiss cheese parable because when I was writing my article on what went wrong at Silicon Valley Bank, I was thinking, okay, 4 slices of Swiss cheese must have lined up. 4 things went wrong. Because if you think about other huge tragedies like a plane crash, right? Or the eruption of a volcano killing a lot of people, it's more than one thing that went wrong. And so I figured for Silicon Valley Bank, there probably were 4 slices of Swiss cheese all of a sudden aligned. Well, when I got to the 9th thing, literally, I listed 9 things that went wrong. I stopped because the magazine I was writing for only wanted 600 words. I could have gone more than 9. That's how many things went wrong at Silicon Valley Bank. That's how much of the Swiss cheese aligned. So what you want to make sure is you fail safe, right? If you have some alignment, it's not going to be terrible. So if think about airplanes, right? Boeing had a door fall off an airplane. The plane didn't crash. It landed safely. It failed. Well, it wasn't perfectly safe. I mean, it's a terrible thing for the people on the plane, but it didn't crash. It, in essence, failed safe. Another time, another Boeing plane, this was with Southwest, had an engine explode, right? It failed safe. In fact, I was on a plane many years ago where we had an engine explode. And I was in the Air Force in those days and I was in uniform. And in order to fail safe, what the pilots did the absolute right thing. They turned the nose down as soon as so that the plane wouldn't stall. Well, it was nighttime. We couldn't see anything, but everyone heard the explosion of the engine. And then when the plane started heading down, it felt like we were falling out of the sky. So people were screaming. It was terrible. Then somebody noticed me and said, ask him what's going on. He's in the Air Force. And I was able to explain that we weren't falling out of the sky. We were failing safe. The pilot was doing exactly the right thing. And we did, in fact, return to Miami and land safely. We recovered. And the airline recovered. It was Southern Airways, which ultimately became part of Northwest and ultimately became part of Delta. But the recovery was safe. So you need to think about this. You may not be able to figure out everything that can go wrong, but you need to set a system up so that you fail safe when things do go wrong. And that leads us to what are known as black swans. And black swans are a category unto themselves. You've probably heard of black swans. You maybe even heard of Nassim Taleb. Nassim is an interesting guy. He has a PhD in finance, or maybe in math, I'm not sure. He's a Lebanese guy who speaks multiple languages. He got his PhD in France, probably speaking French to get it. But he worked in New York for many years. And he got famous by writing Fooled by Randomness and Black Swans and other books, but most famous was Black Swans. But he also got rich betting on black swans. So he ran a hedge fund where they bet on things going wrong, right? So big tragedies in the market made lots of money for his hedge fund. But it meant that most of the time they lost money because these bets didn't pay off. But when they did, they paid off huge. And the point was that they paid off for events he couldn't anticipate. He was just set up so that if anything went wrong, his hedge fund would make money. And the idea of the black swan is for most of human history, we assumed that all swans were white because nobody ever saw a swan that wasn't white. And then somewhere along the way, somebody in Australia, I think it was, found black swans. And now, so here was something that happened that we could never have anticipated because all of our evidence was that all swans are white. Well, there can be black swans in your business. But one of the things that Taleb talks about a lot is lack of planning or lack of imagination is not a black swan. It's just lack of planning. But what you can do, and he talks about this and others do now too, because so many people talk about black swans, is try to turn them into gray swans. And what that means is you don't know what's going to go wrong, but you can sort of categorize the things that can go wrong so that you can be protected at least somewhat. So again, with the airplane, right? Airplanes are built. So we don't know what's going to go wrong on every flight. Like most flights have nothing go wrong. But if something does go wrong, we don't want the plane to fall out of the sky, right? So if a door falls off or an engine explodes or a pilot has a heart attack or one of the things that we did a lot when I was in the Air Force is we did touch and goes where, landing and immediate takeoff where the engines didn't work, or we did touch and goes where the flaps didn't work, or the brakes didn't work, because we're constantly practicing things going wrong without anything causing the plane to crash. And so that's what you want to do in your business. Turn things that could go wrong into things you can manage, and have the metrics, the processes, and the awareness, and put it in your business plan. But this is hard to do. This is not something you're going to do on the first day. But I felt it was important to talk about in the context of adding to your business plan in ways that beef it up. Now, when you're going back to your goals and you say, well, our goal is to, let's say back to the goal we did on the critical success factors. Let's say your goal is $500,000 of revenue the first year, right? Well, that's not the only goal that will work for you. You'd be happy with 550,000. You'd probably even survive with 450. So there's a cone of acceptable outcomes. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, it's kind of like hurricane prediction. They know with some certainty what it's going to do in the next hour. They know pretty well what it's going to do in the next day. But as days go by, they know less and less about what it's going to do, so the cone gets wider. And interestingly, this is just a stock photo that I found online, but it looks very much like the cone for Hurricane Debbie from last week that passed by Florida. And if you were subject to the hurricane, or if you saw anything on the news about it, we had parts of Sarasota where you needed a boat, right? The water came up high enough to flood your car. You needed a boat. And yet the hurricane this was the cone. It passed 75 miles to the west of Sarasota, and yet created all this rain. So the cone showed Sarasota, even though the actual path was 75 miles to the west. So you can have a spread around acceptable outcomes. And again, it helps organize your thinking that, okay, my goal is 500,000. Here's my critical success factor. Here's my critical path to get to it. But I recognize that if it only comes in at 450, that'll be okay. If it comes in at 400, that's outside the cone. That's no good. And of course, at the other end, if it comes in at 700, that was so much better. I should have planned for that too. So maybe I could have had a bigger office or hired more salespeople or done more advertising if I had known that I had such a good chance of making more revenue. So it's a great place for the output of Monte Carlo simulation. But even if you don't do that, looking at your dynamic range and creating a cone of acceptable outcomes gives you a more dynamic business plan. Now, last week, they talked a lot about outsourcing, but they talked about it as a strategic function. Things that, as I mentioned, when they went through SWOT, they kept saying, tell us your strengths, tell us your strengths. And then that sort of outsource things that are not your strength. And that's true. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but this is more of a tactical outsourcing. This isn't so much about strengths and non-strengths. It's about managing your time, managing your cash. So if you're trying to do something really important to get your business off the ground, maybe you shouldn't be answering your own phone. Maybe you shouldn't be doing your own payroll. Maybe you shouldn't be doing your own vehicle maintenance. I mean, whatever it is, there are things that you should outsource, not because you can't do them, but because you shouldn't do them. And so I just listed a bunch of choices here. What I wanted to just sort of key on is HR, because I know a lot of startups, they don't do HR. They say, well, we're not big enough for HR, right? And then they get sued by one of their employees for who knows what, for sexual discrimination, or for not paying them enough overtime, or who knows what it is. And they lose the lawsuit because they didn't have an employee guide. They didn't have a set of rules. They didn't have anyone looking over their shoulder to see if they did HR right, because they thought they were too small for HR. So outsource it from day one. There are companies that will do it. They pay by the hour. It's not going to cost you millions. And they'll write that employee handbook for you. They'll make sure you have policies and procedures to keep you from getting sued, or to minimize the effect if you get sued, or if you have 10 employees and you think you're all friends, and next day you find out they want to form a union or they want to join a union. So, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? I don't even know about unions. Well, if you outsourced your HR, they would know. They would help you. There are some Starbucks now that are unionized. There's some Amazon factories that either are or want to be. Of course, they're big enough to have HR departments, but it's really important. These are things that say, we're not saying whether you're good at it. Maybe you're the best car maintenance guy in town, but you shouldn't be doing it if your business requires 12 hours a day of your time. And then think about down the road on your financing. Think about the good news first. We hit our milestones. The VCs have said we're going to get another $10 million or another $1 million, whatever it is, whatever the deal is, plan for that. Say, well, my milestones are realistic. I figured out my critical success factors. I know I can get to them. And so I can already plan for the next tranche of financing I'm going to get from the venture capitalists, or the next loan I'm going to qualify for from a bank, whatever it is. Plan for that first, start with the good news, but then plan for the backup. What if you don't hit the milestones? What if competition is tougher than you thought it was going to be? Or you came up against regulators you didn't know about, right? You know about every regulator in Florida, but you're doing mail order to stuff in Arizona and they've got regulations you didn't think about, right? So be prepared for that. And then I put in a catch-all category. There's all kinds of things you didn't think of. They're going to help you run out of cash. So plan for the backup. How bad is it going to be? How much more business of my company do I have to give up to get more money? Where can I go for more money? Have it all in the plan, because you don't want to get to the point where you're out of money and now you're calling the banks and saying, I can't make payroll. I need money tomorrow. There's no bank works that fast. No venture capitalist works that fast. And so set the trigger points so that you'll see long before you get to either the good news or the bad news, you'll know how you're doing by your trigger point, and have it explicit in your spreadsheet. Don't just think about it. Don't keep it a secret. Put it in your spreadsheet. Write it down. Do the math. Then the last subject I want to talk about is pivoting, right? Where you go from, we thought we're in this business, turns out we're in a slightly different business, or maybe a very different business. And I can tell you, it's more common than you might think. You look at companies that, they were startups, they were in someone's garage when they got started, and now they're successful, but not in the business they were doing in the garage. They pivoted either because they had to, or because they realized there was an opportunity that they didn't realize when they first started. So they changed their emphasis, they changed their product. Maybe they just needed a lifeline, that by pivoting, they could be a subcontractor to somebody that they couldn't be a subcontractor to without pivoting. So it's going to happen. You need to be agile enough to pivot so that you don't go under because your initial plan is not your permanent plan. So as you're going along, this may not be in your first draft of your business plan, but along the way, start to identify core competencies that weren't the keen ones, the ones that were most desirable for the business you're in. Observe your market. You think you know your market, but until you're in it, you don't really know it, because you haven't gotten the feedback from your customers. You haven't seen how your competitors react to what you're doing. And then be honest with yourself. I always say, don't lie to anybody, but most of all, don't lie to yourself. Be honest about what your chances are of getting your revenue goals. And then think about, well, if we pivot, what's going to happen? What will that change to our funding source? Or maybe the pivot comes from the funding source. Maybe they say, we'll give you another $1 million if you change your emphasis from X to Y or A to B, right? So be prepared and be flexible and harvest those new opportunities. And I can never give a pep talk without going back to something from Churchill. And I like this one. This is, his most famous quote. And I'm sure he said versions of this all through World War II. But the interesting thing is, he didn't say this. And I got the picture of him in uniform, but he didn't say this, at least not the first time, to his audience during the Blitz. He said this to a graduating class of boys, with some sort of boys' high school. And he was the speaker at the graduating class. And he gave this famous line then. And then, of course, versions of it throughout the war. But never give up. If you got a business that's going to work, you're gonna stay with it. One another of his famous quotes that I've used in other presentations is, if you're going through hell, keep moving, right? Just get through it. It's going to work out okay. So that's my story. Hopefully, if you need more information, you can ask a question now, or you can request a mentor. It's the same slide we showed you at the beginning. It's not hard to do. Get a mentor. It's not hard to find our recorded webinars, including this one, although we will send you the link to record to this one, get to this recording. But there are lots of others done by me and many of my colleagues. You can find them all on the website, and you can see the URL and the phone number on the bottom of the slide. So I'll turn it back to Diane.
Thank you. That's a story, and you're sticking to it. I did put the link to last week's webinar in the chat. If you're interested in copying that or clicking on it, well, don't go there yet because we still have a few more minutes, but there are no questions in the chat. I don't see any questions in the Q&A either. So I'm saying that you did a spectacular job, Alan, and no one has any questions. So that was outstanding. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? Because I want to thank everyone for coming. And you will be receiving a survey. If you could just take a moment to fill out that survey. There's only a few questions, a handful of questions. What did you think of our webinar is number 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, with 9 and 10 being our goal. But feel free to grade it the way you feel. But more importantly on that survey is an opportunity for you to say, what other topics are you interested in? We're always looking for presenters, and it really is helpful if you tell us what sort of messages you need. Also, I would encourage you, as Alan said, to go to our website, score.org/Minnesota, and apply for a mentor. They're free and really can help you in your business. You know, I think a lot of my clients feel that we are not only sources of information, but we keep people on track. You know, we'll meet with you every week, every other week, every month, and just say, so how are you doing on your goals? And that helps a great deal as well. So I see no questions coming in. I'm going to say that, Ellen, you did a fabulous job.
I think we should
And
mention next week's webinar as well, because it's the
it's
same
actually
thing.
in 2 weeks. It isn't
Oh,
next week. It
okay.
is in 2 weeks. And the title of it, let me just pull that up so I can, $1 Million Dream or Money Pit. X-ray your business idea. And that is so important at any point in your development, but certainly if you are thinking about starting a business, that's a good place to start. So yes, thank you for that reminder. The email that you get with the link to this recording will also give you a link so that you can sign up for that webinar, and will also give you a link to last week's webinar. So all-inclusive email coming your way. You'll get 2, one from our chapter and one from our national organization. So without further ado, no more questions. Thank you, Alan, for sharing your knowledge with our group. And I'll say goodbye to all and have a great day.